All right, it looks like people are filtering in now. So, hello and welcome. My name is Nate Bailey, and I'm working in collaboration with FamilyKind, a nonprofit organization that empowers children, parents, and couples before, during, and after separation or divorce. We are able to bring you this peer to peer webinar series for professionals free of charge because of the generosity of our two sponsors, Our Family Wizard and SoberLink. Our Family Wizard is a comprehensive app that enables you to conduct all of your co-parenting communication on a single platform. Powerful tools document your parenting time, reimbursement requests, payments, exchanges, and more. This means less conflict and more energy to focus on your children. SoberLink supports accountability for sobriety and child safety, combining a breathalyzer with facial recognition and wireless connectivity for real-time results and reports. SoberLink's new family assistance program offers alcohol monitoring free of charge to anyone who qualifies. By increasing our total reach in our mission of supporting families affected by alcohol abuse, this program will help continue to reduce litigation and foster peace of mind. If we can move to the next slide. Today's webinar is entitled Mediating a Prenuptial or Cohabitation Agreements. We're going to learn from two experienced professionals today, Amy Karen Day and Ivy Menchel. Amy Karen Day is a mediator, Good Talk for Children facilitator, and an advisor for FamilyKind. She has been a family and divorce mediator as well as a collaborative divorce attorney in New York for over 25 years. Amy has dedicated her private practice to educating clients with family and divorce disputes to help resolve them out of court in a peaceful, fair, and efficient manner. She has been an active member of the New York State Council of Divorce Mediators and the Family and Divorce Mediation Council, along with the New York Association for Collaborative Professionals in New York City. Amy has worked extensively with children of divorce, as well as teaching conflict resolution skills to children in her volunteer work. Amy received a BS in Human Development and Family Studies at Cornell University, and then a Juris Doctorate at Brooklyn Law School. Now, Ivy Menchel is a certified divorce financial analyst who began her financial services career almost 24 years ago at a premier full-service brokerage firm. Ivy is the founder and president of Family Wealth Planning Partners. Today, she and her team work with matrimonial attorneys, divorce mediators, and their clients to address the financial issues of divorce and assess their options for fair and equitable settlements. Ivy supports and educates her clients and their advisors through the entire divorce process. She is trained in mediation, and though she does not practice mediation, these skills are utilized in traditional or litigated, mediated, and collaborative cases. Ivy's mission is to empower clients to make sound financial decisions today and in the future for themselves and their families. Now, a few housekeeping notes. Today, our program will run for 1 hour, and please feel free to send your questions utilizing the chat feature in the bottom of your Zoom program. They may get answered as the presentation progresses. Otherwise, we will also take time to answer questions at the end. Now it is my pleasure to turn things over to Amy and Ivy.
Hi there. Thank you, Nate. Nate, are we going to have a poll today as well?
Yes, we do. So I will go ahead and launch that first poll, just asking everyone about their role in family law. All right, looks like we have a good amount of responses there, so we can take a look and see who's here today.
Great.
Interesting.
So we do have those other poll questions. Did you want us to do those right again at the beginning as well, or throughout the presentation?
Sure. Actually, we could do that at the beginning as well, because that will
Sounds
help
good.
us to know.
All right, so it looks like quite a few inexperienced with cohabitation agreements.
Okay, great.
And we've
Okay,
got
we hope we
one
teach
last.
people, we hope we teach everybody a little bit then.
Right, exactly.
So for our last question, just asking if anyone who has mediated one of these agreements, have you collaborated with any of the optional professionals throughout that process? Fewer responses here, of course, because not everyone has mediated these agreements. But for those who have, this is what we're looking like.
Great, great. Not surprising. I'm guessing also that there's a lot of people who've been involved in prenuptial agreements on the legal end of things, just haven't mediated them. And that is what makes today so exciting and interesting. FamilyKind is actually in the process of developing a program to start mediating prenuptial agreements and cohabitation agreements. So we really wanted to share some of our thoughts with the FamilyKind community about who might benefit and why mediation really might be a great process for prenuptial agreements and cohabitation agreements. Because I think that prenuptial agreements and even the idea of having a cohabitation agreement usually conjures up a lot of negative images for people. I think a lot of people avoid the conversation till the last minute. Some people argue about it, throughout their engagement. It tends to be a really negative process for most people, and something that people even fear. So I'm really here to wanting to help you as practitioners who work with people who want prenuptial agreements, or certainly people in your life who are considering having prenuptial agreements or cohabitation agreements, that there's a way to reframe the idea of having an agreement, reframe it into something more positive. I think that some people think of it only as insurance in the event of a breakup, which of course is true. And it does allow you to plan in the event that there is a breakup. But I would also encourage you to think about it as a more positive experience and to tell couples that this is really a great, great opportunity for you to be able to plan for success in your relationship and to plan for more communication and to plan for hopefully real peace in the relationship so that you never get to that point where you need the prenuptial agreement because you're divorcing. So,
You know,
yep, go on, Ivy.
so sorry, Amy. So first of all, of course, as a financial professional, when I hear you say insurance, I think of it in terms of protection and making sure that your goals are achieved, right? So it's so funny, based on your professional background, how you view insurance. But why don't we first start with, like, can you talk about some of the typical kinds of cases that you tend to see, with either prenuptial agreements or cohabitation agreements?
Sure, sure. And I think that these are the kinds of agreements that a lot of us already think about. It tends to be a second marriage, a third marriage, where there are children from those earlier marriages or relationships, where there are substantial assets, there's a business. People want to protect something or someone from a prior relationship. And so they say, I want a prenuptial agreement. They don't necessarily know what that means in terms of really what they want in the agreement, but they vaguely know, I want to protect these things from my past. But there are also a lot of other people who could really benefit. And this is what we wanted to talk about too, in terms of people who might come to FamilyKind or come to you. People, I'm seeing more and more in my practice. I'm seeing a lot of younger people, millennials in particular, who may not have a whole lot of money. They might have lived together for some period of time and then gotten married. But I think that a lot of them are operating under a certain assumptions. And those assumptions in some ways are really myths. And when people start to understand that, when couples start to understand that, they realize that a prenuptial agreement would actually be really helpful. Probably the number one myth I see when I'm working with people, even at the divorce stage, is that if they keep their income separate, throughout the marriage, and they just keep all their accounts as separate, which a lot of people do, that those accounts will somehow be treated as separate property if they end up divorcing. We've been doing it our whole marriage. Of course, it's separate property. When in fact, under New York law, it is not separate property. It really is still marital property if it accrued during the marriage. That's what New York law says. It might not automatically be divided 50-50. There might be a different way in which to divide it, but it is marital. And I think there are some couples who really do want to keep their money separate and would like to think that if they ever divorced, it would stay separate. And so that's a really good reason for couples, even without a lot of money, to maybe want to put some of these thoughts in writing. The other is the issue of death. If a couple's getting married and they have separate property and marital property, a lot of people think that that separate marital distinction would also be held up would also be recognized if they were dying. When in fact that's not true. The idea of separate and marital property is a concept for divorce, not as death. So in death, all of our assets are our assets. And under New York law, and many people listening might already know this, that you have to give your spouse at least a third of your estate. And if you don't, that spouse can elect against your will and get a third of the estate. And I think tons of people, young people, old people, don't realize that when they get married. They assume they can draw up a will, and whatever that will is, they assume it will be followed. When in fact, if you wish to not leave your spouse at least that 1/3, then you actually do have to have a prenuptial agreement that states that. Another good reason for having an agreement is a cohabitation agreement. And these are couples who are not getting married, maybe never, maybe in the future, and they're purchasing homes together. And I'm seeing that a lot. Those couples, and I haven't done as many of these, but the ones I've done have been quite interesting, where the couple is really working out how much are each of them going to put into the purchase, whose name will be on the title, on the mortgage, how will they pay for the apartment throughout the relationship. Again, just preparing for peace in the marriage. Let's figure out what we're going to do together. And then, of course, figuring out what would happen if they broke up with that property. Can someone stay? For how long? How would they divide up the proceeds? So cohabitation agreements are really getting more popular, as well as more and more people, especially I see in New York City and in Westchester, where I've practiced for years as well. I'm seeing them want to create these agreements and even have it be an agreement that can work if they get married as well. And then it could be an agreement that considers children as well. I mean, there's all sorts of agreements that one could put into a cohabitation agreement that may feel very much like a prenuptial agreement without New York law being behind it at all, because they're not actually married. And then one other area I'm seeing, and this is another area that I'm really finding interesting, is people wanting a prenuptial agreement to actually help balance out the wealth and money in their relationship. I've had a couple of couples in the last 6-8 months who are really not all that comfortable with the money that they have coming in. They don't plan to live their lives using that money, but they do want to keep it separate, mainly to please their families, but for other reasons, of course, as well. And I'm working on these agreements that are helping them go into the marriage with a little more balance, and to allow the person without much money to build up perhaps more wealth, to make them feel more balanced. And a lot of my thinking on these kinds of mediations have been using this book called The Generous Prenup. If anyone else has seen it, it's written by a mediator in Boston. And it makes a lot of great suggestions for the couple who really do care about having more balance. And an example would be the spouse with less money building up retirement accounts and those retirement accounts being treated as separate property, where the moneyed spouse would have their retirement accounts treated as marital property. One of the cases that I have right now, they're entering into a marriage. They've been living in a very large apartment that is owned by the soon-to-be husband. He decided to put the home into the wife's name and to basically create marital property that he certainly wasn't legally obligated to create. But it's something that he felt would be a way to bring them on more equal ground going in, and not just putting her name on it, but our agreement is now addressing what they are going to do with that apartment and what happens if they sell the apartment, what happens if they break up while living there. So there's a lot of creative things that can be done. And it's with couples, obviously, who are married or not married and maybe never plan to get married. But having these conversations certainly can be very difficult. And I'm really going to pass this over a little, to Ivy, because she's going to talk a little bit about how to have money conversations and how important those conversations are. So Ivy, do you want to?
Sure. Thanks, Amy. So, I may be biased, but I really do think that it's critical to address, finances when negotiating a cohabitation or prenuptial agreement, because in relationships, there are really like three ongoing conflicts, whether it's household chores, children, and money. So if we can help the couple beforehand, I think as professionals, we're certainly doing, our clients a good service. People rarely have conversations about money, right? We live in a society that it's taboo to talk about money. And though we may talk about money, we don't really have like true conversations, true meaningful conversations. And when you look at a couple, both of them come from, different backgrounds, different upbringings, and there are many factors that actually impact a person's money profile, right? It forms early on in childhood. Each party receives different messages from, his or her parents, right? There could be cultural differences, psychological differences, community or race or gender or class. Even the neighborhood that you grew up in or the school that you went to. All of this will have an impact on what I call your monetary blueprint, right? So this will come into play. Each party comes to the relationship with different intentions and different expectations. The good news is that there may be behaviors and habits that differ, but there also may be some easy for me to say, similarities. So, people think of money as a currency exchange, but in fact, it's really very emotional, and it does mean different things to different people. So, for some people, it could mean security. For some people, it could be freedom or power or status, right? But all of this is emotion. Even something like financial security, it's really a feeling. Some people feel financially secure with very little cash available, and yet others can, feel that they need so much more when they have millions in the bank or invested. So really, financial security has nothing to do with how much you have. It's all about how you feel. And, as human beings, most of us would like to think that our financial decisions are based on rational considerations like cost versus benefit or need versus desire. But really, our heart controls as much, if not more than our minds, and these emotions really will come into play like during the negotiations.
Wow. Ivy, you probably are seeing people also behave really differently when it comes to money. I'm wondering, and I know you're going to share a little bit with us about patterns you're seeing in the behavior.
Yeah, I wish I could say that there was just one good rule for everybody, but there isn't. I've seen a lot of crazy things through. No, I don't want to say crazy. I've seen a lot of unique things through the years, right? And personalities and how people handle money. But as I'm sure you have too. Based on the book Money Harmony, Roadmap for Individuals and Couples, which is by Olivia Mellon and Sherry Christie, there are actually 5 main money profiles. So there's an amasser, and for them, money measures, achievement and self-worth and accomplishment, and they're really likely to be overly concerned with keeping large sums of money at their disposal so that they can save, they can invest, and also can spend. Then there's an avoider. And, these people, they don't want to think about making money. They don't want to think about managing it. They think it's all going to work out. And really, this individual, has a disdain for cash, and they're not interested in any of the boring details of money. And then there's a hoarder, and they fear that they are going to run out of money. They like to save, and they're really reluctant to spend, and spending actually creates anxiety for them. Then there's a money monk where, accumulation of money can really corrupt their values, and money should be spent for social justice. Wanting money is greedy. They feel like it's selling out, and they're really motivated to give, even at the risk of their own personal financial security. I actually had a case where, the wife would not have enough money to maintain her lifestyle, and she still wanted to send money back to the old country to her soon-to-be ex-spouse's parents. I mean, she couldn't even afford it, so it was interesting, right? And then there's a spender, right? And money helps them feel loved and accepted and approved, and they're really spending money to bring immediate pleasure, but for these people, they can actually extend to indulging. They'll indulge for others too. There are some other profiles, such as a worrier or a binger, or maybe a risk taker or a risk avoider. But those five are the main personalities. And I think it's important to keep in mind that the purpose of getting in touch with one's partner's money personality, I mean, certainly your own personality too, but it's not to pass judgment. It's just a way to get the conversation going, and to truly begin talking and understanding, right? And really, I guess most importantly, to really respect the differences between the parties, so that you can create money harmony for the couple.
A lot of these, Ivy, these profiles are sounding basically unhealthy. And I'm wondering if you think there is a healthy money profile.
So Amy, if I could poke fun at you, isn't that your perception, right? That's your bias, right? That you think that they're unhealthy. I mean, again, it's not good or bad. It's what are your underlying motivators, and what's important to you, and how you feel about money. And I work very hard to not look at it as negative. It's just these are the personalities. So offline, Amy, we can talk about your bias to that. Okay.
Yes, I'm sure everybody's trying to figure out where exactly they fit in under the profile.
Right.
So how do you get couples, starting gathering, their financial information?
So I will talk about couples, getting couples started, but let me just take a step back and first, like, how do you get the couple talking to each other? Because I think that's part of our mission too, right? Like, how do we get them talking to each other? And people are always anxious to bring up money. How do I start the conversation? So I think, like, maybe an easy way to start, would maybe even talk about, like, the money lessons that you learned from from each of your parents, or what does financial freedom or financial security mean to them, or if they are going to start a family, like, what kind of money values do they want to pass along to their children? And then once you get them started, then they have to, like, do the heavy lifting, right? Do a financial inventory, gather everything that each of them own and everything that each of them owe. And I think also, people don't talk about this that much, but I think it's a good idea to also each party to share what their credit score is too, because especially if, they're living together, they may be buying a home together. You want to know what you're up against, right? Then, have a conversation. What are both parties earning? What's their income? Where's their income coming from? How will they spend? How will they each contribute to the households? Will it be equal? Will it be pro rata, based on their income? How much will they save? Will each party, like, save, a certain percentage in a savings account, or will they each contribute to a retirement account? Will they have a joint account? Or will they keep money separate? Or maybe they'll keep a portion separate and contribute a portion of their income into a joint account, and there is no one right answer for this, but it's a discussion. It should be a conversation beforehand. Or, and I'm a big believer in, like, setting up, like, certain, guidelines, like, each party can certainly spend like $100 without telling one another that they spent $100. But, if you spend $5,000, is that something, what's your limit? Up to how much can you spend without telling the other one? And then over a certain limit, then you share it with the party, right? We don't want any surprises. And also dividing responsibilities in the relationship, right? Will all expenses be split equally? Will maybe one party, let's say, pay the mortgage or the rent, and the other party pay the groceries and utilities? There is no one right answer, so they have to work out, and hopefully with our help, work out what works best for them. And also get, like, share, like, what their goals are. How often are they going to vacation? What does travel look like? What does retirement look like, or financial independence? These are great conversations to have early on instead of being surprised years down the road. And then I say, have, like, a monthly financial date night, right? Like, what's the current state of affairs of finances in the household? Do, like, some sort of checkup. And I know it doesn't sound, like, sexy, but maybe they could even make it fun. Like, if they talk about it for a half hour, then they go do something, they crack open a bottle of wine or whatever, whatever it is, but make it fun. And the good news is these days there are actually apps that can help with, help coordinate the finances. There's Honeydew, there's Personal Capital, there's Twine Savings. And another good book to read also would be Breaking the Silence by Kathleen Burns Kingsbury, to really get that conversation going, because you really need to have these conversations as you begin the mediation process. It really helps smooth the process. So with that, Amy, I'm going to, hand it back to you. And why don't you talk a little bit about, your process for cohabitation and prenuptial agreements?
Sure. Okay, thank you, Ivy. Okay, so I want to switch over by talking about process now. Process for coming to agreements. As Ivy said, a lot of these conversations can take place with a financial planner, with a therapist, just between the couple. Certainly, an agreement is not absolutely necessary. But for the couples who really do want to have a prenuptial agreement or cohabitation agreement, the way in which they go about coming to one can have a huge impact on the couple, on the final agreement, and even how they view what they went through. I have had several divorce cases where they have told me how that prenuptial process negatively impacted their whole marriage, sometimes relating to the in-laws, sometimes between the couple. And I bring a lot of that back to the traditional way in which prenuptial agreements are created. I certainly know in New York, I haven't practiced in other states, but the typical way of doing it is that one person, usually the person with more money who is initiating having the prenup, goes to an attorney and they choose, oftentimes a litigation attorney. They're not really paying attention to what kind of attorney. Usually it's just got to be a good one. And that attorney hears what the client says, but they have to fill in tons of blanks as far as many of the details of really what this couple wants. And again, when people say we want a prenuptial agreement, they don't really know what that means necessarily until they sit down and really start working out what is separate property, what is marital property, the real details that need to be resolved. And what happens is attorneys throw in the kitchen sink. And generally speaking, we get a prenuptial agreement that is quite aggressive, quite one-sided. And then that agreement is then given to the fiance. The fiance then goes to an attorney and finds out, wow, this is a really aggressive agreement. And the couple starts to have conflict. They might never have had conflict before. And it's very, very upsetting. Here they are planning a wedding. And rather than the two attorneys talk or the couple talk, it becomes the two attorneys negotiating in quite a litigious way when, of course, there's no litigation. So I actually had a consult this week while I was planning this talk, and it was the absolute perfect kind of client to tell me exactly what I'm talking about. The husband-to-be spoke to an attorney, started getting some information, and came back to speak to his fiance. They had just gotten engaged 6 weeks ago, I guess it's been. And as they talked, it was immediately confusing to them and brought them into conflict. And the husband kept saying, the soon-to-be husband, I'm not sure I totally understand this, so maybe we need to talk to somebody. And she tried to talk with someone, and then she got confused. And they then decided to look up, let's find a mediator. They're actually starting next week. And they just were the perfect couple for doing this talk, because I think they're the kind of young millennials who are taking charge and saying, we don't want to go down that path. We don't already like, what's happened to us talking about this. So they want to sit down and talk first. So my very strong bias is towards negotiating prenuptial agreements first before anybody drafts. I've been doing this work in collaborative divorce as well. And the collaborative process is two attorneys sitting down and talking with the two clients. I'm doing more mediation, and certainly for FamilyKind, we're talking about doing it as mediation. Either way, the idea is get the couple talking and get the couple to come to an agreement and learn how to start communicating about these issues and learn how to start problem solving. Oftentimes it is not this young couple. I wanted to give another example that I found extremely interesting, because they were in their 70s. And the topics were in no way similar to these young couples. It was really about what to do if one of them ends up in assisted living, or will they go together? Will they not go together? If they leave their home to the other person, how long can they stay? Can adult children move into care for that parent? They had issues about Medicare. They even had issues about how to bring their dogs together, to the point where when I spoke with the attorneys, once they had consulting attorneys, I think we all agreed that it was possible this couple was never going to actually end up living together, because their dogs did not get along. But again, these are interesting and complicated issues at every stage in life, and it enabled them to really get it all out on the table. I think also the idea is that you're sort of training yourselves to talk about it in advance. And I think that the couples who do call me for a prenuptial agreement, and this doesn't sound interesting to them, the idea of all sitting down and talking, even though it's scary, they really want their two attorneys to just handle it. Those are not the right clients to mediate. And those are not the clients that I tend to end up working with. So not everyone, of course, is going to want to do this. So let me just talk a little bit about my actual process. Thanks, Ivy. So my actual process starts with New York law. Particularly with the young couples who don't really know exactly why they're coming in for a prenup, but they know they want one. The ones who've been divorced before have a clearer sense of how they want to structure their agreement based upon what they went through in their divorce. But the couple who's never been divorced before, I tend to start with New York law. So I give them actually a 2-3 page sort of cheat sheet I developed, which I'm happy to share with anyone who's interested. But I go through that in the session, and I give them a mini lesson on how New York views separated marital property and support. And we go through some of the main issues, also regarding estate law, so that they have just a general sense, not going into a lot of detail. But I want them to have that basis, because they need to know first, what would happen if we had no prenup? And now let's switch and talk about what it is that you would like to have. What is it about the definition of separate property and marital property is not consistent with how you two envision your lives going forward? And that whole conversation about marital property, as well as the conversation about support, usually spousal support, not child support, can be very, very different, of course, if they're anticipating having children. And so that is a very big part of the conversation as well. And I'm always surprised when the couple is surprised by that question, because they will say, we don't want any spousal support. We're both working, and we are both earning a good living, and we see no reason to ever get spousal support. And then I will say, do you think about having children? Tell me about your plans. And it just hadn't occurred to them that there might be a situation where someone actually might need to have spousal support at some point in the future. So that's the kind of conversation that I end up, having with them in the process. And of course, the typical things that are needed in a prenuptial agreement are still going to be needed in a mediated agreement. There's still going to have to be full financial disclosure.
So Amy, how do you incorporate in your process, like, the assets and the debts and all of that? How do you bring that into your process?
No, you're right, Ivy, because I'm not doing all of what you are doing in your process with them. And planning this with you, I've learned a lot about what I could be asking and talking about more in terms of their past and thoughts about money. What I'm generally doing is, getting a net worth statement, which I think we all do. I try to also really have them exchange the actual documents, because that's very different than just seeing the net worth statement. Seeing the documents may be something they've never done before, and maybe never planned on even doing during the marriage, especially if they've never worked with an Ivy before. So that's something I really try to do. And then also tax returns, to learn more about income. If there's a business, we talk about appraisals for the business as well. But that's usually the extent, of what I'm asking couples to do. Sometimes consulting attorneys might ask for additional documents. And that is another necessary part of the process. It's usually very disappointing for people to think that they've now got to go to consulting attorneys. So again, I try to make it very positive as best I can. But my take on the law is that it's even more important in prenuptial agreements to have consulting attorneys than it is even in divorce settlement agreements. That it not only protects you as the client, but that it also protects you if your spouse-to-be is represented by an attorney. But there's also, of course, the issue of what kind of attorney you hire and whether it's an attorney who works well in the mediation process, same as when we work with couples in divorce, what kinds of attorneys. It's also, though, extremely important to collaborate with other neutral professionals. We need to admit as mediators what we know and don't know. We also need to help couples to gather the information that really overlaps with this process, with the prenup or cohabitation process. And that can be financial planners. Ivy obviously is giving you a sense of what she could do with a couple when they're starting out. Trust and estates attorneys probably come up the most for me too, as far as the estate part of the prenuptial agreement. They are very good at the estate part of the prenuptial agreement. And I think divorce attorneys are better at the divorce part. So working together can be really helpful. Mental health professionals, absolutely. And appraisers, absolutely, for when we really need to know the value of an asset that's written on a net worth statement.
As I'm sitting here listening to you, right, it's certainly making me realize, and really, not that I didn't know this before, but really reinforcing that prenuptial and cohabitation agreements are also a team sport, right? Like you need a whole host of professionals so that the clients can go to that negotiation table, that mediation table, try to take out some of the emotion, but certainly you want them there educated so that they understand both parties' situation and circumstances so that they can better participate in the process, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. And actually, I think, Ivy, we're at the point to answer some questions, because I see we're at 1:45. Do we want to bring in some from the chat or Q&A? Sure. It looks like there's some from both.
Yeah, I think Nate or Leslie were going to read them. Is that correct?
Yes. So I see we did get some questions in both the chat and Q&A. First off, what do you do when you think one of the parties is not being honest with financial information?
Imagine, just think that would happen.
Yeah.
Is it okay if I take this?
Absolutely.
It's funny because I can't say that if a client responds like this, I know that they're being dishonest. But I guess doing this long enough, you get a feel for what doesn't feel right. Like if it's taking a client a very long time to get information, or if they don't submit it or share it in a timely manner, that really starts to get my antenna up. And I think you need to ask some additional questions to see why there's a delay or why we don't have an understanding. Sometimes maybe it really is that the client doesn't understand their financial situation, and then perhaps you need to bring some of their professionals that they've used in the past. So if you start to ask questions, if you start to ask questions, you'll get a feel for whether the responses feel comfortable or not. And if it doesn't feel comfortable, keep asking and keep digging deeper. I don't know if you want to add to that, Amy.
I agree 100%. And I would say I also I blame New York law as well. I simply say that if you want an enforceable contract, you don't just want to sign a prenup. You want to sign a prenup that's going to be enforceable. And it's not required actually in every state to have full disclosure, but it is in New York. I see also here people are asking if I would share my New York law cheat sheet, and I'm happy to do that. I'll get information about the registrants, and we can send that out. And Ivy also, I'll brag for you, Ivy. She has a pretty wonderful workbook that I'm seeing for the first time, planning this with her, that she uses with couples as well. To get them thinking about some of the issues that she's raised here today. So I don't know if that's something.
Yeah, I'll be more than happy to share that. And thank you, Amy. And shame on me for not sharing it with you sooner, right? But I see somebody put in the chat. I read it somewhere along the lines that sometimes clients don't allow them to request financial documents. And that would really be a concern for me. And Amy, you could answer, how you respond to that. But if they're not beginning their relationship, if there isn't transparency early on, at what point do you develop transparency then, right? And then how are you creating a document if both parties haven't shared and made each other aware of your situation? I don't know if you want to add to that, Amy.
No, I mean, I think you've said it. I think you said it all. Yeah. I was going to mention one other thing, because I see Ellen's question about inheritances, but also I don't have couples usually put an inheritance or an expected inheritance in a net worth, because they certainly don't own it yet. But I certainly raise that, and I ask that as a question. And very often that's one of the first things that people voluntarily tell us about, because that's one of the things they're trying to protect. But I was going to say also, we talk about the issue of death. A lot of times when people do waive rights to each other's estates, because they want to protect separate property, they do put something affirmative into the agreement about what they actually are going to do to protect their spouse. So it could be that they're going to leave the house to them, or it could be that they are going to have life insurance of $1 million. There could be other things that we put in affirmatively, so that even though they're allowed to put anything they want in their will because their spouses, they're each waiving rights to each other's estates, I try very hard to help them come up with what can still protect each other.
I see we received another question. Do you do a DV screening prior to mediation for a prenup, and why or why not?
I would say I definitely do a lot more with divorces, which is probably a mistake. When I'm talking to prospective clients for mediation with divorce, I pretty much always speak to them separately at first, which I know a lot of mediators don't do, but I really like to have an initial, usually 15 minutes with each, partially because of DV, and to really get a sense of their comfort level negotiating, getting a sense of what it looks like when they're in conflict, how do they act. With prenups, I do that sometimes, and I have those same conversations. The problem is with prenups, a lot of times they want to do their consult together. So I don't get a chance to have that, but that's a good question.
Another one we got, is there a time limit to sign the prenup before the marriage?
There is no absolute strict, certainly there's nothing in the statute. Most attorneys would say as far in advance as absolutely possible. Most of my colleagues probably would say 3-4 weeks is a really good idea as sort of the closest you should get. And with that, we've all had the experience of them signing the day before, the night of, the morning of, which is horrible. It's horrible. But in terms of enforceability, most people really want there to be more time in advance. And there isn't one element, except for unconscionability, that really makes the agreement invalid on its face. I think it's a combination of factors. If you have an attorney, did you sign it far enough in advance? Was there financial disclosure? These are all different elements. And if any one or more of those things are missing, it starts to weaken the agreement substantially.
Thank you. All right, we did get another question. When it is the parents or other family members driving the movement towards a prenup, do you ever ask them to join in on the mediation to address their often unspoken needs?
I have not. I have in divorces actually, but I have not in prenups had the family come in. I see my job as empowering them to talk to their parents. And so not yet. I could see it happening. And it certainly is a very big issue with one of my cases in particular right now. But a lot of what I've done is sit down with him and talk to him about how he might speak to his parents. And that's actually a collaborative case. And there's been conversation with him and his fiance and the other attorney about this. But the parents do play a huge role in a lot of these cases, and it's difficult. But I could see doing it.
We did receive another question for Ivy. What was the title of that book you mentioned about money archetypes?
Oh, it's a great book. It's Money Harmony by Olivia Millen and Sherry Christie. Money Harmony, a roadmap for individuals and couples. And then the other book that I mentioned is Breaking Money Silence by Kathleen Burns Kingsbury. So those are two really good books. And then I will give the plug for my workbook right now. And I'll be more than happy to share it with everybody, but it's a workbook that I created that really helps people get in touch with what money means to them, because money really impacts so many different areas of our lives. And thank you, Amy, because I'm glad that you found it helpful and informative. I guess I should do a better job of sharing it. I need a good publicist.
Well, I think one of the things, and Ivy and I talked a little bit about this after I looked at the workbook, is as a mediator who's not a mental health professional and not a financial professional, I read it, thought, wow, this is really great information to get from a couple as a mediator. Probably even better just for them to share the experience of filling it out, and that it's, as Ivy said, an experience that's really more for them. But as the mediator, I would need to put much more thought into how to take that information and bring it into the mediation process and have it assist us more than the background information that I tend to get.
Well, so I think that, right, like Cy Sims, an educated consumer, are our best customers. So I think that they're coming to the negotiation table with more trust, more transparency, I think more confidence. And I think that you will experience that, you will feel that as you're going through the process with the clients. And certainly, my fear is like, oh, you look at a client and you say to yourself, oh, they're a hoarder. So then then you have that bias in your head. And believe me, I have to work really hard
on their forehead.
Right, exactly. Or like, it goes like that, right? So that's my fear as professionals, overthinking it.
Right.
Where's that fine line of overthinking it, but yet being educated enough to kind of help them through the process and, like to a hoarder, or an amasser, what would it look like if you had just a little bit less? You know what I mean? Or for a spender, what are other ways that you can feel appreciated without going out, weekly and, buying a $5,000 briefcase, whatever it is. I mean, I'm just making stuff up, but, I think we'll all see different clients in the process, which I think would help too, because that's the idea of mediation, to come to some peaceful agreement without putting on the boxing gloves, right?
We did receive questions as to the title of your book as well, Ivy.
Yeah, what's the title of it? Defining Your Wealth. And I'll be more than happy to, send a copy to, all the participants, today. I'll be more than happy to share it. And then, of course, I'd love feedback too.
Wonderful. So there is one other question in the Q&A I see, which is, what words do you put into the prenup in case the parties who waive the rights to each other's estates would buy a home together and want the other party to inherit their share?
Well, that's a drafting issue, but it's distinguishing between your estate and real estate, which real estate, the names on the title are really determine where that real estate goes. And so if the parties have it in joint name with rights of survivorship, it's not really part of the estate in the sense of leaving your spouse a third, etc. It would automatically go to the surviving spouse. So it's actually not necessary to worry about it in that situation. But I'd be writing in the agreement that it is going to be in joint name with, rights of survivorship. It becomes an issue if it's only in one party's name. So if one spouse owns real estate, vacation real estate, let's say, and they want to leave it to their spouse, we could specifically say in the estate section that property will be left, other than, left to the spouse. Other than that property, they're waiving rights to each other's estates. Okay.
I just want to jump in here. That was really great, Amy and Ivy and Nate. I really appreciate it. Amy and Ivy, you gave us so many great things to think about and sort of elucidated this subject. I just want to add that it really makes me just continue to believe, as we're adding this as a service, how wonderful this process is for the couple, pre-marriage, pre-cohabitation. What a healthy way to approach big decisions, financial, emotional, whatever they may be. And so what you're giving them is not only help with this particular decision, and like you guys said, not in an adversarial way, in a cooperative way, but tools for later, because we know couples face decisions all the time. That's not going to change, but it's how they approach it that's very important. So I really want to thank you for the really thoughtful and comprehensive way you discussed it today.
Thanks, Leslie.
Thank you, Leslie. And I think you're so right. I think it's great that we're giving them tools, for the future too, right? Not just addressing the prenup or cohabitation agreement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Very forward-looking. Mm-hmm.
And I have to agree, Jennifer Safian, I love mediating prenups and cohabitation agreements as well. I think for the practitioners out there who do divorce, it's a really interesting and different part of our practice. And I think it's helpful to have that balance sometimes when we're dealing with divorce. Not that there isn't conflict and they aren't difficult cases as well, but it's fun and interesting and different.
It was interesting to me when we had the survey, the breakdown of professionals. I do have to say I was disappointed that such a small portion were financial professionals, because to your point, it is so gratifying to really come to an agreement. I haven't worked on as many cohabitation agreements as I have prenuptial agreements, but that other professionals don't realize that it's a financial discussion too, and that I was surprised that there were such a small percentage of professionals who practice in the financial area. So we'll have to change that.
Exactly.
Well, wonderful. Thank the both of you very much for such an excellent presentation. I'm sure you can see the wonderful feedback that you've both received in the chat and the Q&A. We hope that everyone who's still here can join us for the next peer-to-peer session on April 19th, again from 1 to 2 p.m., when we will have a financial consultant and an author present on financial support for family law professionals. Of course, we will send a follow-up email containing the resources touched on by both of our presenters today so that you have those names of those books available to you. We hope to see you all at that next session, and everyone have a wonderful week.